Well, welcome everyone to this episode of Prophetic Insight. On the line today, or should I say on the screen today, is my good friend Adam Livecchi, who is the founder and the pastor of Rescue Church and also We See Jesus Ministries, which is a ministry that does a lot of missional work, has done stuff in Africa, has done stuff in his background right there is Haiti, has done stuff in Dominican Republic and many more places, but just such an honor to be in relationship with Adam. He is a man of God, an awesome son, and a phenomenal husband and father. He and his wife, Sarah, are in North Jersey, and they have three beautiful children there that we love so much and can't wait to see as soon as this is all over. But I thought it was so important to have you on, Adam, just in light of all that's going on. But why don't you start off by just telling us how you're doing, how are things there in the ministry?
Yeah, so I'm thankful. We're navigating about a 5-year-old and change church plant. So things are relatively small. So when things are relatively small, I think it's easier to have a handle on what's happening. I think it's easier to take the temperature of 25, 30 people versus 500 or 800 people. So that's the one thing. The second thing is I think that people in general respond to trauma differently. And so some people fight, some people flight, and some people are kind of just stuck. And it takes them a while to process, like, what am I actually in? What are we engaging with? What's happening? And so I saw, all of that, all of those different type of responses from the people that are entrusted to our care. And I think that if we're honest, as pastors, I think sometimes we see responses that are really encouraging and we're like, wow. Like I had one, my friend Will, he's calling me up telling, oh, there's big need in the Dominican Republic. We got to do something. And then that kind of pushed what we're doing for the ministry to the next level in terms of feeding every week. And it was because he had come to the Dominican Republic with me a bunch of times, and he's a Spanish-speaking guy who connected with our ground man there, Manny, and Manny, and their friend. And so Manny shared what was going on, and immediately, by the grace of God, we stepped in. But it was through that relationship, through the connection, and through understanding, what other people are going through in this time that we're able to, kind of jump in and help as we're able. So I think that it all starts with care. And I think that care is a desire to genuinely know someone's state. How are you? And I think that within our context, the needs are very different. Like, if I be honest, I don't know anyone in our church that is hungry in any way. Most of us have gained weight, and I don't say that to be funny, other than that's a different context. Like, we're dealing with people in the Dominican Republic who are hungry, who are on the edge of hunger. What we're dealing with in Haiti is beyond hunger. It could, if this doesn't loosen up, it could get real bad, and it's already really bad. So I think that everyone has a different context, but in our context, the number one call the police get is domestic violence. So the domestic violence issue is exacerbated when people are stuck in a house.
Yeah.
So you have all these different type of dynamics. I mean, there was someone who was killed by the police in the streets. I think it was in Jersey City. It was literally on Instagram. Now, that guy probably had plenty of food. He certainly had a gun. And so the needs are different, but they're real. And just because the need isn't something that is seen and tangible, like I need a bag of rice and beans, or I need meat and steak and eggs to eat, it doesn't mean the needs aren't real. And so I think that within our context, we have to learn to see the needs. Like, one of the great challenges that as a pastor I see is that for people who are single, they are in a sense alone a lot, even though we know that they're with the Lord and he's a real person. People who are single are kind of like that, I mean, when you're talking about being in a house almost all day, almost every day, that's very difficult. I mean, for me, I'm surrounded by people. I mean, if someone said, we'll lock you in a house for a week, I'd say that's amazing,
Yeah.
but, but if that was every day, it may not be amazing. And so, just being sensitive to the needs and discerning the needs. And I think in this time, it's really critical, especially for pastors and leaders, to really be sensitive to not only the people, but to Holy Spirit, because sometimes people, they want to be encouraged. And I think that if someone is really suffering, then that's really important. But I also think people in times like this really need to be challenged. And we need to take an inventory of our value system, of our decisions, of our beliefs. One of my old pastors asked me a question. Steve Hannon is his name. What do you believe? Where did it come from? And what fruit has it bore in your life? And I think that now is a time of reflection. David wrote Psalm 32, a psalm of contemplation. I think now would be a good time to consider our ways, like the prophet says in Haggai. And I think that this was also, in a sense, preparation for the future. I know that we do have a real tragedy. People have really lost loved ones. But I also think it's getting overplayed. I think the media has been dishonest on purpose, and it crosses the line from news to psychological warfare. And we know that media does push propaganda. I mean, Disney did that in World War II to solicit the American people to get into the war. Now, the benefits of that was long lasting and good, but not all propaganda is obviously good. And so we have to know what's being pushed on us. And, so I think that go ahead.
No, I was going to say that's really interesting. I wanted to talk a little bit. You made mention about one of your leaders and just how he's kind of been highlighted in the season, how he's really taking some ownership. I just think about Joseph, and I think about how Joseph understood who he was called to. He understood what he was anointed for. He understood the grace that was on him, which is why in every dark moment he continued to prosper all the way through until the time that there was a famine in the land. And so when I think about your leader, Will, it just reminds me of just how God anoints certain leaders to step up and to lead in certain seasons. Can you talk a little bit about how maybe you've seen in your circle or even in your city, some of the leaders that have stepped up, and what kind of ramifications have been a result of that? What kind of positive outcomes have been a result of maybe the way that the church, including your church, has been responding to the needs of the people?
Yeah. So here's another one on needs, right? There's some guys that we're friends with, like within the whole West New York area, not necessarily people who are attending the church, but people who the church and people from the church have had an ongoing and consistent relationship with, right? Some of those people, they don't need food,
right?
But they needed a phone call to say, hey, how are you? Do you need anything? We're here for you. So I think that there's been people that have stepped up with that. Joseph, he's been helpful shooting video with me. I mean, just little things like Brett has this really wild testimony, supernatural thing. He prayed for this woman. She was pretty much dying and everything turned around. And, it was a really great testimony. And we were all on Zoom. And I said, hey, Brett, try not to get anyone healed next week. Just try not to impact anyone for Christ, because the virus is here. So we just got to just tone it all down, joking. But so, yeah, you have that. And then you also have moments too, where you're looking at things and you're like, okay, do people see as well? Because you have the good. And also part of pastoral care is seeing, like, you find out where people are and you also find out where people are not.
Right.
And so how you process that is important, that gets filtered through grace. because we're going through a season and a time that people have never been in before.
That's right.
And just because I've been through a bunch of traumatic events doesn't mean people have, you know?
Right.
So you just gotta, I'm just looking at everyone through the lens of grace. And I want to be patient with people the way the Lord has been with me. And some days that's easier than others. But the reality is that we're all a work in progress. God is going to finish the work he began in us.
Amen.
He's going to perfect that which concerns us. And I think the question becomes, do we love people well where they are while calling them forward? And you know, sometimes you need an event like this, not that God sent the event, he didn't, but sometimes the benefit of a troubling time or a trial is it gives you a real clear like inventory and location, and it lets you know like all the things that maybe you didn't want to know.
Yeah.
And then one of the things that's good about that is that in honesty, the only way like really forward, I mean like the only way really, really to go forward is through tough decisions and hard conversations. And so there's no way around that, you know?
Yeah.
I think for me as a pastor, I've realized that in my context that there's things that I could do better and be more intentional about. Like right now we're on Zoom. And the reality is that we've been on Zoom, I think, at least 3 times since this thing started. That's probably more frequent than we may have talked before this. And I think that sometimes a hard time shows you the real value of genuine relationships.
Yeah, I agree.
So I'm going to try to be more intentional about my use of technology, because I think that me personally in our church, I think that we could have done a better job. And that's just me being honest, critiquing myself, you know.
I think I think if we all were to be honest, there's different ways that we all could have grown. I think for us here in Philly, there's many different ways that we're thinking through how to kind of take things up another notch and really care for people from a distance. You know, with bigger churches sometimes comes bigger challenges, and so we kind of find ourselves responding well, but knowing that there's certainly room for more. And so, you know, I really appreciate that. You know, you mentioned something early on. You talked about the picture behind you. You said you were in Haiti, and I'm just thinking about in 2010, I believe.
Yeah.
Haiti suffered a 7.0 earthquake. Close
Yes.
to 250,000 people died. And
Yes.
we were right in the middle of it. Today, you find yourself in the middle of this epidemic, and you are in North Jersey.
Yeah.
I've been to your place, minutes away from Manhattan, New York City.
Yeah.
And probably one of the most concentrated places when it comes down to cases of COVID-19. Talk to me a little bit about ways that this is different for you than what you experienced in Haiti in 2010, where literally the ground began to shake, and moments later, you had yourself in probably one of the worst situations that a human could be in.
Yeah. It's very different because the Haitian situation was all of a sudden. And so, you know, I was sleeping when the earthquake struck. So that one event was showing me that I could trust God with my very existence. Mm. Because my wall blew out, my ceiling was collapsing. Every house in our neighborhood, everyone's dead, except our house. No one died. The pastor's daughter had a deep cut on her foot from a block, you know, that fell. Yeah. And she recovered. She still has her foot. I mean, so that was really all that happened in terms of our house. So I'm thankful for that. But that was an all of a sudden thing where the level of grace that you experience is to the level of trouble that you're in.
Right.
God always gives you more grace in that moment than what you're battling against. And so grace is released in the time of need. So I experienced an extreme amount of grace, and I'm super thankful for that. This was more of an ongoing, to be honest, if I'm really honest, this lasted a bit longer than I thought it would have. And so you're kind of like, you have grace for the moment, but the moment is it's a longer moment, Yeah. So there's that. But this to me, right? First of all, when 230,000 people, I think that's a football stadium filled like 11 times or something. It's a lot of people. Yeah. No, excuse me. That was Rwanda. I'm sorry. That was Rwanda. Anyway, 230,000 people is a football field. 7, 14, 21. I mean, it's a bunch of people. It's a lot, and you're talking about 30 seconds. When I left there, it was like hell with no fire, blood in the streets, bodies in the streets, mothers screaming the name of their children they would never see again. I mean, it was an absolute, it looked like hell with no fire. It smelled, the smell, everything, carnage, bodies, just very raw. This is not like that because it's very isolated in the sense of people in hospital rooms. And the reality is the nurses and the doctors are doing a great job. People are being cared for. Nobody who has needed a ventilator has been denied a ventilator. We're operating like now our government sent people checks. I mean, this type of stuff is unheard of, right. In most of the world. So I don't want to magnify this as much as the media has, because I think it's unfair. What I think is really difficult is for those who have lost loved ones and those who are in a battle now, because for them, this is just as real as an earthquake or a tornado, the loss of a loved one. It's a tragedy. It's terrible. It's not easy. And not only do you feel the pain now, but you feel the pain later because they're no longer occupying space in your life. And so the initial loss and the pain, the suffering, not seeing people in funerals, it's very real in that sense. It's very challenging. I don't want to in any way sound insensitive to that, because that's not my heart. But I also think that in terms of, if you look at the bigger picture, I think our government was actually a lot more prepared than people thought. They've tested a lot of people, which is why the amount of people went up. The numbers that they gave us weren't actually real. There's people who are dying of other things, and it's getting blamed, as COVID-19. There's also financial incentives for that to happen. That was the way things were structured. Hospitals get money, I think, if I understand correctly. So there's a whole bunch of different things that are happening. I mean, but I just think that it's been kind of overplayed, except for the people who are losing people. I mean, then it's not being overplayed. It's a disaster. It's a tragedy. It's real. So I hope hope I'm making some sort of sense there with that. I'm just, no, that's I'm trying to be cautious, because when you're dealing with the third world, right? Many people don't realize this, and I understand that I had the privilege of ministering in the third world. There is no safety net. When we asked Manny, we said, "How is everything in Dominican Republic?" He said, "People are suffering." And I go, "Like, people are hungry?" And he's like, "Yeah, like a guy in my neighborhood right across the street, like right here, called me and said, 'Dude, I have no milk for my child.'" Like, this is not like, in our culture, there's food banks. Your church does an incredible job feeding people in the light. In the Dominican Republic, the church does it. So when I asked Manny, I said, how's things going? With the government, he said the government hasn't even been there. He said, we've been feeding people every day since this started. So for me, in the nations, you really see the church that isn't afraid shining. The church that is afraid, they're hiding.
Yeah. So let me ask you this. We know that that God works all things out for the good of those who love him.
Yep.
Talk to me a little bit about how you see God using this to make the church stronger on the other side of it.
That's a great question. Andre, I've thought about this a bit, and in our culture, within the Western culture, and even generally north to south, we're talking Canada to Argentina, there are pockets of persecution, very small, but it's not a systemic persecution that is in China, Pakistan, certain Middle Eastern places, right? So one of the things that God does is God does not send tragedies, but God uses a tragedy the same way he would use persecution. It's obvious that God is not sending persecution. It's not like God is not like, hey, let me persecute my church. That doesn't make any sense. It's like me cutting myself. There's no sense to that. So, in fact, when Paul was persecuting the church, Jesus said, why are you persecuting me?
Me, yeah.
So I see that God uses the tragedies, the disappointments, and the hardships of what seems to be normal life, viruses, earthquakes, these things that happen. He uses them the way he would use persecution, the same way he did in Acts 8, where all of a sudden Jerusalem is under pressure.
Yeah.
Now the gospel is going to the nations. Folks are not gathering, in a building, but there's people on Zoom. I've never even met them.
Yeah.
And people are liking and watching, people are following the church, and they've never even set foot in our building. So I think that God is using these situations to reveal the neediness of people. To say, I have a need in my life, and it may not be rice and beans or steak and potatoes, but when people feel uncertain, they reach for certainty. What is that? Truth.
Mm-hmm.
They reach for Jesus. They reach for prayer. They're open. And so God didn't have to send it, but God can use it.
Yeah. That's good. What are some things that you're learning as a pastor, as a husband, as a father? What are some things that you're learning during this time as you've been home now well over a month? A guy who's really active, along the list of titles I forgot to put in there, weightlifter and bodybuilder.
Not a bodybuilder. Hold up. I like to move some weight.
Someone who certainly, you really take care of yourself. And you're a guy who goes to the gym and works out with the fellows. By the way, you have a great group of guys there. I love them. All awesome guys. But like as someone who's constantly active like that, now being home, and I'm sure that there's ways that you appreciate this season, but what are some ways that you're growing in, some things that you're learning about yourself, or even leading people during this time?
Yeah. So let me start with this time in my reality, right? Because everyone has a context, and everyone has a context. We have to learn that everyone has a conscience, everyone has a context, and people are living from their experience of the word, their understanding of themselves and their situation. So I have an amazing wife, right? And she's a school teacher. So she's teaching up in my office. I'm homeschooling the kids. So the fact that she's home means I'm getting cooked for. And she's not going back till at least September. So that's a huge blessing for me, right? And so I'm first thankful for that. Second of all, my wife is not a super feelings oriented, high maintenance person. So her not needy. Like her and I could be in the same room. I could be reading or doing something. She could be there, with me 2 hours. We say 10 words. So she's like easygoing, not demonstrative. Go with the flow. And she does her thing, I'm doing mine, and we're doing our thing together. So I'm watching the kids, I'm homeschooling them. she's doing work. I'm jumping up on my pastor and some local pastors. We've been praying almost every day at 3:00, praying or talking, encouraging each other, staying in faith and staying, observant of what God is doing and expecting toward what God is doing. So that's been a huge strength. I've been with my pastor. He's given me a Hebrew lesson yesterday, the Hebrew alphabet. So his name is David Greco. I love him. So, we have good support in that sense. My dad is with us. So, he's out and about. He's definitely not like on lockdown. Like you have to physically lock him down. He's not receiving that, So, so we're doing our thing. And I think that with the children, especially for those who have kids, you have to control or be in charge of the narrative. And I say that because my kids are not afraid. They're going outside and playing. They came to church with us last week because we're starting to ease back into a church situation and some normality with that, without pressure on people, but saying, hey, we're going to be there. And we had people walking off the street. We had, so it's different. Our context is different. But I've learned a lot. Like I wasn't prepared. I didn't have a house gym. I have space for it, not a lot, but I could have had something and I didn't, and I wasn't prepared because I didn't anticipate this. So I think that this helps you to anticipate and to think about things that you may not have any other way.
Yeah.
And we had a conversation with the pastors, and my pastor started it. And I think that it may be beneficial for me to share something about it briefly, just because he was talking about Haggai and considering your ways and thinking about putting our house before the Lord's house. And I read that and I was, just really marinating on it. And I thought what was really intriguing is that Haggai starts by saying, you guys are saying that it's not time. But God is saying it is time.
It is time.
And then he gives the word. So before God even gave the word, he read their mail and let them know what they were saying, and that what they were saying wasn't what it really is and wasn't right. And then he talked about people that clothe themselves but not warm, eat but they're not full. And if you read through the metaphors are they're doing a whole bunch of stuff, but since they're not putting God first, they're living in a profound sense of frustration. And so even though they're making progress, they left captivity, they're rebuilding their houses, they're putting on new additions, they're hanging flat screens, there's a deep sense of frustration, even though their needs are taken care of, because they haven't put God first. And I think that what is my hope for the church now, my hope is that we would have a long enough Selah to really analyze, where are we not putting God first? And what is the root of that? Well, the root of that is if I don't trust God, if I don't really trust him, then I cannot really put him first. And so we have to go and examine ourselves and prayerfully ask God, show me areas where I haven't put you first. And I know that many times we haven't put him first, because when he's not put first, he doesn't add to something that doesn't put him first. So wherever there's usually, not always, but often where there's a testimony, there's a lack of a testimony, it's often a place where God hasn't been put first and given the spot he deserves.
It's a place where idols need to come down.
Idols. Smashing idols. Yeah. And that's something that's not me pointing a finger. That's me saying, God, search my heart.
Yeah.
God, examine me. And I think that now would be a great time for us to enter into some of these type of dialogues with God, and also with one another, and asking God, like, well, what is it that you are wanting to do? What is it that needs to happen? Where have we not put you first?
Yeah.
How do we readjust and recalibrate? And how do we make the most of the moment we're in now? Because the moment we're in now may last longer than we thought it would have. For me, it already has.
Yeah.
And I felt from God that in spite of what's going on around you, you need to be marching forward. Like, I can't let what's going on around me determine my season. I learned that lesson when my wife and I got married. God was preparing me because we went through a really, really rough church split. And now since that time, we're really good friends with the pastor and his wife. We love them. But at the time, it was really difficult. And some people were thrown out of a church. And the Lord had spoke to my wife and I and said, you just got married. This is a season of joy in your life. Don't internalize this church split. It's not your situation. Even though it affected me, God said, don't let it infect you.
Right.
And just because something affects us doesn't mean it needs to infect us.
That's a word.
Yeah. And I think that it's the simple truth of you're seated with Christ in heavenly places. Well, I'm not in a heavenly place. I'm in my office in New Jersey. And as far as I'm concerned, my office doesn't look heavenly yet. So, but what does that mean? It means that I have the mind of Christ. And it means that I don't have to live as a victim of my circumstances, but I live from the heavenly places in Christ through the mind of Christ toward those situations. It doesn't mean that I deny that they're real. It just means I don't come under the influence of the situation I might find myself in. You know, if Paul and Silas did that, they wouldn't have praised God at midnight. So you cannot come under the influence of the situation that you may find yourself in. And I think that some people genuinely need to just repent and ask God to forgive them. I know that sounds old school, but like, confess your sin. Like, before I get God to try to do what I want him to do, which is often what we call prayer, before I do that, I just need to be honest enough with him and say, I've fallen short of the glory today. I have maybe used my mouth in a way that's inappropriate, or I'm upset about something, or I've given something a voice in my life that it doesn't deserve that. Lord, forgive me. And here's what I need. You know, starting with confession. I mean, bringing back the fear of the Lord to the church. What is my hope for the church? My hope for the church is that the fear of the Lord would cause us to put God first, so that we would be God conscious. I don't want to be COVID conscious, or I want to be God conscious. And I'm not saying don't wash your hands, but I'm saying I want to be more focused on my hands healing the sick than my hands catching an infection.
Yeah.
You know, and I think that these type of situations tell us things about ourselves that maybe we didn't have the courage to say to ourselves. Kind of like a dream, you know, not every dream is thus saith the Lord. Sometimes you're getting a dream and the dream is telling you something about yourself that you don't have the courage to tell yourself while you're awake.
Yeah.
You know, I've been there, you know, so I'm just saying that I think that reflection, contemplation, considering our ways, I think that these are all gifts, actually.
I agree with you. I really do believe that this is a season of returning to the garden. That was the word that I had going into this year. Many were speaking about, you know, vision, and I agree that there were some things relative to vision, but I did remember having a dream, and the Lord clearly spoke to me about returning to the garden, a place of intimacy, a place of pure worship, and I feel like in many ways that has been the case for many who have been home and wondering how to work through this. They have sought the Lord, and they've returned to the garden. They've returned back to their first love. And as a result, you see them prospering through this. Where many are going through this, there are a lot of people who are growing through this. They're going to be stronger on the other side of this. You know, you can't grow from faith to faith unless your faith is being tested, and there's an opportunity for you to be able to develop in that area as you spiritually mature toward Christ. And so, yeah, man, I really do appreciate that. As we close, any encouraging words you have, but I want you to speak to a specific group of people. I want you to speak to the next generation, the millennials, the what are they, Gen Zers. Any closing remarks for them? I mean, for them, they're living through something that most people have never lived through. Many of us have, I wasn't around for, the Great Depression. I was around for a recession, but we are living
Yeah.
in probably one of the hardest moments in our nation, and they're living through it with us. And what encouragement do you have for those generations?
I think that the Lord is preparing them to lead in the future. And I think that when you see where God takes you and what God takes you through, that's foundational to who you're becoming. And so many people have said a lot of negative things about millennials. I myself have, if I can be honest. And I'm a millennial, I'm just being honest. I don't know if we're doing that, but
No, we're absolutely doing that.
okay, good. So it's like it's like, can I be honest in church? And so my thing is that these things that they're going through are meant to not deform them, but form them. Because the thing is that if you're going to be in ministry, if you're going to have a kingdom impact, the kingdom suffers violence and the violent take it by force. So what happens is it's the same principle of death and resurrection. It's the same principle of sowing and then reaping. It's the same principle of the little boy gave Jesus his lunch before he ate lunch. So you go through something to become something.
Mm.
You know what I'm trying to say?
Absolutely.
So now here you have a young generation. They're going through something. They're observing something. They're either observing our faithfulness or our unfaithfulness. They're either observing a solid leader who's steady or someone who's all over the place. I just hope that they learn not only from their errors, but also from the mistakes of others and also from the examples of others. Take everything that you have seen, everything that you're going through, everything that you saw, okay, I wouldn't do that, or that's the right way to lead. Whatever you're recognizing, I hope that they can kind of like import that into their library, their iTunes library, so to speak, and have that cataloged for the next catastrophe or for the next thing that they find themselves in. See, because the people who were conditioned for this are leading well now. The people who weren't conditioned for this are all over the place. And you see it. And if you're a shepherd, you can't be shook. I mean, you just can't. How are you going to deal with a wolf if you're afraid? I mean, you can't. So the thing I would say to young leaders, millennials, generation, the younger than them, Z, right? Generation Z.
Yeah.
I would say really be observant, and I tell people, I say, like, if you watch me, you may see some good things to do, but you also may see some things not to do. And that's part of my humanity. I mean, that's what Paul said, follow me as I follow Christ. If what I'm doing isn't following Christ, I would say don't do that. I would like to be able to say, follow me as I follow Christ, that every single thing I do is Christ-like. But I mean, sometimes I tell jokes that aren't very funny, but I still think they're funny. I'm just being honest. So I would just say to the young people that are coming up to be very observant, to be teachable, to be a learner, to approach even a tragedy as an opportunity to learn, to grow. Reaching out, because that's a generation of people that is very feelings oriented. So you got to reach out to your friends and say, hey man, how are you feeling? Are you okay? Can I pray for you? If you're a believer, now's the time, man. Pick the phone up, shoot a text, send a DM on Instagram. I mean, post stuff that is faith building. Be intentional. Don't just spread fear, spread faith, encourage people. Check on people. I mean, that's what I would say, just in a practical sense, because those people, the millennials and the Generation Zs, if they navigate a hard time well as young people, as a young man or a young woman, they gain credibility and trust to lead, even with people who are older than them. You know, when you look at David killed Goliath. David was younger than his brothers.
Yeah.
And so here you have now a solution to a national problem found resident in the youth group. It wasn't in the young adult ministry, and it wasn't in the elders and the board of trustees.
Yeah, yeah.
And I don't mean to say that to promote rebellion or craziness. I'm just saying, just step up.
Everyone has a place.
Step up and take your place.
Yep.
And whatever you're afraid of, you won't have victory over. So don't be afraid of this virus, and pray for people, encourage people, check on people, love on people, spread faith.
Amen. Wow, such an encouragement. Thank you so much for that.
Yeah, man.
My kids see that as well. And so, yeah, man, thank you so much. Really appreciate you. My love to you, bro. Thanks for coming.
Love you too, man. Love your whole group. Yeah.
That's our episode for this week. Again, check Adam out. He's on Facebook. He's on Instagram at Adam Livecchi. Thank you for joining us for this episode of Prophetic Insight. Blessings.
Take care.